What's up, everybody? Undad back again for another video on Survival Hunter. Today we're going to start a series I mentioned in my previous videos for walkthroughs of the 8 dungeons in the Mythic Plus pool this season. So this is going to be the first one in the series. There will be 7 more after. We're just going to walk through the dungeon and talk about things any specific things you might want to think about while playing survival, whether that's your talent choices, your gear, specific things you do pack to pack. Just to dive a little bit deeper into how to play the class when you're approaching Mythic Plus. Now I know this kind of style for this kind of thing is maybe atypical in that I'm not going to utilize playback footage to show you the pulls because I think it's a little bit easier. I've always found WoW to be like a preparation game, and just knowing what you're dealing with is maybe more important than actually dealing with it. Like, it's a lot easier to just play the game when you know what's up. And MDT is or Mythic Dungeon Tools is a really good add-on for this. Now, I'm sure most of you, if you're consuming this content, probably have this downloaded already, but I will put a link to the download to this add-on in the description as well below if you don't have it yet. Usually this is used for like making routes, and we'll use that kind of in these videos as we move forward to like show you what pulls are going to look like as I'm talking about mobs. But what I'm really going to utilize here is if you go in here and you right click on any given mob, the creator of the add-on Nagi, who raids with Echo, has like added all the spells in here. Like, each mob will just have the spells they do, and you can look at the tooltips and kind of see, okay, what am I dealing with? How does this exactly work? And if Blizzard is good at one thing, it is, well, usually good at one thing. It is consistency in how their tooltips are written for spells. Like, you can almost guarantee how something is going to function by how the tooltip is written. And I will kind of explain when there come up some examples. I'll explain kind of what I mean by that. One big example that we will talk about in here that I'll get to, I'll point out that I'm talking about it, but I want to go like chronologically through the dungeon to not get confusing. So first thing is, we're going into Freehold. We can talk about talents. The first thing you're going to do is figure out what talents you're going to play. I think the Coordinated Assault build is very much superior to CA in here, mostly because of how effective it is on the second boss, the Council of Captains. The 2-target cleave inside your CA is very strong. Not that your cleave is not strong with playing like a no cooldown build, but it's a bit stronger with CA. And 1 of 4 bosses, it's important. And your damage on trash packs is like, you're kind of going to move between like a big pull into a little pull into a big pull. Like, that's kind of how this dungeon works. You have the freedom to do whatever you want. So when you have cooldowns, you'll do a bigger pull. When you don't, you'll do a smaller pull. With that said, if you want to play a no coordinated assault variation, you're going to do just fine in this dungeon as well. It's a lot of cleave. It's a lot of AoE. So you'll be missing the single target loss less. Like, it'll be less important. You can also play Mongoose Bite versions as well. These I talked about in the talents video, which you can find on my channel. I go kind of really deep into the talents. We talk for like an hour and a half about talent choices and why I like them. So if you're interested in the difference between those, you can check that video out. But I recommend Raptor Strike with Coordinated Assault. And there is no utility over here I would change. I would make sure I have Trank Shot and Intimidation. These 2 I think are very important in this dungeon. I'm a Scatter Shot stan. I think this is better than Binding in every dungeon with New Binding. I think New Binding is really bad, but you could get some use out of Binding in here. A lot of the danger of this dungeon is tank damage. It's just a lot of mobs that melee your tank really hard. Like, it's really like, we'll go through, each mob kind of has 1 spell really in the dungeon, and the rest of the danger is your tank dying. So Binding Shot can be more useful for that than Scatter Shot, but generally I think Scatter Shot is really good. There's a lot of casts and stops in here that Scatter Shot is really valuable for the single target stops. So that's what I would run as talents. I wouldn't change anything from this build. If I were objectively saying what I think is the best build for this, I would run this. Besides talents, we can talk about gear a little bit. Trinkets, you can lean towards more AoE-oriented stuff. So, for example, like Spear Fragment, which is generally a better AoE trinket than single target, would I think be the choice over Dice. Pocket Anvil, not great at all because it's primarily single target. Wouldn't play Beacon of the Beyond. The Bomb Dispenser, which I don't have yet, is going to be a little bit less value because it's just single target damage. A lot of this is AoE, so you really want to roll with stats or like AoE, more AoE oriented trinkets. So like Harlan Sweete is still very good actually. And what other trinkets am I missing? Something like the Black Dragon Scale from the first boss from Kazara would be very good, which I also don't have that trinket yet. And I'm missing one. I can't think of it. But I'm missing a trinket that would also be decent. Let me pull up the raid trinkets. It's another trinket. Oh, the class trinket. Class trinket would also be quite good because you're gonna have big pulls oriented around your coordinated assault, and this will be very good as well, along with the haste base stat. So as far as trinkets go, I would, I guess, lean towards more AoE oriented, which basically means more stat oriented trinkets rather than damage effects. And then as far as actually, we'll talk about pets pull to pull because there's some points in this dungeon where swapping around pets is actually pretty valuable. So let's dive into this. Let's talk about like what you're going to see as like normal pulls. Now, obviously, you're not going to see exactly these pulls in your pugs. You'll probably see some variation of it, but it's important to understand how mobs interact with each other in some places and what to know if you pull like X mob with Y mob, if that makes them more dangerous or something else you're going to worry about. So this first pull is primarily you'll do this. This is a pull that's like pretty much this season I've seen this done by every single group I've done. Back in Battle for Azeroth, this pull was actually skipped a lot. You kind of just shrouded up and did a pull up here a lot of the time, but this has become the norm. We'll see if that stays that way. So this pull has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different mobs in it. The primary one being the Iron-Tide Enforcer. Now this is like the primary lieutenant mob in this first section that you'll see pretty much every pack has an enforcer in it, or at least every pull that you would do, right? Like there's very few pulls you could do in here that wouldn't include an enforcer. So understanding what this guy does is obviously important. Brutal Backhand is just a frontal that you dodge. There's nothing unique about Hunter in this sense. Shattering Bellow is just a big AoE hit to everybody in the group. It's physical damage, so it's reduced by our armor. That's good for us because wearing mail makes us take less damage from this. This is potentially a reason to run a tank pet. I recommend in most situations to run a ferocity pet, which is the leech pet. Until you need to run something else, basically. Like I would default to ferocity pet, and this goes for every dungeon. This is not just Freehold, and I'll mention this, I guess, in every video from now on at the beginning, but I would run a ferocity pet to begin with, and then as you start to find yourself like, man, I could use this here, or I could use this here, you could swap to a cunning, which is the freedom pet, or a tenacity, which would be the HP tank pet. The pet itself is not tankier, it just makes you tankier. So say, for example, you get to a high enough key and your healer is really struggling with making sure you don't die to the Shattering Bellow. Running a tank pet makes you a lot safer because you're just going to have more HP and you can hit the unuse to gain even more HP. Fortitude of the Bear, which gains you 20% of your max health. It's like a little last stand for Hunter. So be thinking about this on here. I, however, actually think tank pet is the worst pet to run in this pull in particular, and actually in these situations, for a reason that may seem weird, but basically the only time you're going to die to Shattering Bellow is usually if you get Shattering Bellowed into the Vile Bombardment, which is a boss ability, and that's actually not listed in MDT. It's this encounter event, but I can pull it up in the dungeon journal to show you what it does. But it's basically what is commonly referred to as getting pooped on. So basically, Vile Bombardment, this happens throughout this whole first portion of the dungeon until Skycap'n Kragg is dead. This happens, I think it's every 15 seconds. A giant green pool spawns and does a bunch of damage and slows you. But because it has a slow attached to it, you can pre-freedom, so you can use your Master's Call from a cunning pet and take no damage from the initial hit. And that's because when you read this, these are both included. Like the damage event and the slow is not really separated. It inflicts damage every 1.5 seconds and movement speed is decreased. So famously, there are mobs that have a movement speed decrease attached to their damage event. They are the same, one and the same. It's not like applies a debuff that slows you. It's the damage of this thing slows you. Like they're the same thing. And that's how this is worded, as they're the same thing. So in this situation, if you have Blessing of Freedom or the Master's Call buff, which makes you immune to all movement impairing effects for 4 seconds, you will take no damage from this. Other things that work are things like Blade Storm for Warrior. I actually don't know what... Maybe Ghost Wolf functions that way? I actually don't know if the Ghost Wolf tooltip reads that way for Shaman. But basically, anytime you have something that makes you immune to movement speed effects, be looking for how the tooltips read, or just be testing to see if the damage can be immune entirely. So basically, if you have the buff on here, it won't do any damage to you when it falls. So why that's important is you will die on pulls. The only way you'll really die on these pulls, and what to be worried about, is if you get Shattering Bellowed into a pool dropping on you at the same time, and you're kind of low going into it, and you're like, I'm low enough that I'm barely going to survive the bellow, and if this drops on me, I'm getting one shot. You can freedom yourself to be safe. Now, leech pets are also going to keep you a little bit topped, so I run the leech pet, but I would opt for trying to immune the green pool damage with a freedom pet before I opted into a tank pet, I think, on these pulls. So just something to keep in mind, and cool stuff that you can share with your group, and can kind of also help your healer out if he has to stand and plant and heal, it's bursting or something, and you can freedom him so that if a pool lands on him, he's safe to keep casting. So that's a main mob. The other ones are a little bit less involved. We have the dogs, which just buff themselves. This can be soothed by us with Trank Shot. Not really worth it. These guys aren't too dangerous. And then Crippling Bite. This is another thing that can be immune with the Freedom Pet. However, the initial damage of this does not get immune to, and it's on random targets, so it's a little bit tough to do. But if you have a Freedom Pet out, you can remove the bleed, which really doesn't do anything. It's mostly the slow you're removing. Next, we have the Corsairs. This is just tank damage. There's nothing in particular we do with these. We have the Crack Shot, which drop the big AoE circles. Just move out of these. Shoots. Using stuns on these is pretty useful. Just because this is just extra group damage that you can stop. The rest of them are all just entirely tank damage. So these will target shoot on random players in the group, and you can use Intimidation to stop these if you need to reduce damage. And then finally, we have the Bone Saws. This is the one kick in these, and this is a 15-second cooldown on this ability. So one melee kick will be able to handle this, it's the Healing Balm. One melee kick will be able to handle this. Important to look out for. It can be purged if the cast gets off, so be on the lookout for that as well. But generally, you just want to kick it. Just pick one, kick it, and that's it. And the other stuff is just tank damage. So that's really it for all the other pulls in this area. There's no other mobs except for the pack mules, which don't do anything. This is just like extra mobs to hit if you want. But other pulls that you might see in this area is you might see just this 4 pull come across, which has one crack shot and double bone saw, and then a Corsair that doesn't matter. So basically just picking what you're kicking, communicating with your group if you can, or like marking one that's going to be your kick. Like sometimes in pugs, I like to say like, this mark is always going to be me, and then you just bind a mark. Like I have triangle bound when I'm not using an auto marker. So like in a pug, you can just say, if I mark a triangle, that means I'm handling the kick. And that like helps people know like, okay, I can worry about other kicks, which is usually the biggest issue you end up seeing with pugs. Maybe less so this dungeon, is just like overlapping interrupts on stuff. And then you end up in bad situations. So this is a pull you'll sometimes see. It's important to LOS over here. I know it feels awkward as Hunter because you're trying to get in a good spot for your bombs to hit everything, but you have to LOS over here. The Crack Shot just won't come in. And then sometimes you'll see a pull like this to unlock the boss, and this pat will sometimes be included in it as well. These are all mobs from the first pull. More of the same. This is definitely a situation where this pull, Tank Pet, may be actually better than the Freedom Pet, because you can get, these will not cast at the same time, the Shattering Bellows on these two, but they usually will cast within like 3 to 8 seconds of one another. And sometimes it's tough for your healer to get you topped up, and being able to rip a Fortitude of the Bear and just have infinite HP in between to like self-heal yourself, pretty good. Also, be looking to save Exil for this moment as well. You want to cast it in between the two casts. Because once you survive the second one, you're good for quite a while. It's like a 20, 25 second cooldown or something on it. So it's just the in-between. After the first one hits, you want to top yourself in some way, heal in some way, whether that's healing potion, exhilaration. Maybe you use turtle on one or two of them. Sometimes you can get both with turtle, but I wouldn't recommend sitting it. Usually, if you just immune one of them, you're chilling. So that's it. There's not a lot of other pulls that are done in here. You could try some other stuff. This count is relatively efficient, not much more efficient or less efficient than the rest of the dungeon, though. So you usually keep this to a minimum because there's a lot of downtime over here that you end up having to pull other stuff. So then we get to the boss, which has 2 phases. First phase, he just blasts you with pistol shot. He casts 2 to 3 of them in between each charge. I think they tried to normalize it to 3, and I haven't picked up on if it's been extremely consistent yet, just because I'm doing other stuff while I'm fighting. I haven't noticed completely, but basically once 3 shots go out, you have a little breathing room to have the next charge is going to happen, where he takes some time, he stops shooting everybody. So you kind of want to be counting in your head in this first phase, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm safe. Because if you take a 1 or a 2 shot and you're low enough to get killed by the next one, you want to use something. You want to exil. You could use a tank pet in this situation as well. I still like Freedom Pet or Leech for phase 2 rather than tank pet. I would ideally you go into this part of the boss having other cooldowns, like if you have Survival of the Fittest, you have Exil, you have Health Potion, and you're able to use those, so you don't have to run Tenacity Pet. But if you have nothing left, I would swap over to Tenacity Pet. You can always swap to other stuff for the next phase. While it's annoying, you can always do it. And if you have Paladin in your group, the Freedom Pet is less useful because your Paladin can handle it. So this is count 1, 2, 3. If you're in danger after the third one, that's usually a time you don't want to use something because he's going to charge. Your healer has time to catch up before the next shots. And we wear mail, so we're usually like, we wear mail. We have higher health to begin with as hunters, so we're usually not too scared of this, but sometimes it'll happen. And then phase 2, we have the return of the encounter event, because when he is riding, so in phase 1, he's riding the bird, right? And the bird has been flying around, and that's what's been causing all these pools to drop. It is quite literally poop. So when he's riding the bird, the poop stops happening. So you don't have to worry about that. Now phase 2 starts and it begins again. You'll have the bird will fly up, he'll drop a pool, he'll wait a little bit, he'll charge across the arena, and then he'll fly up again. Right after the charge, which is just a straight line across the arena that you dodge, this will usually one shot you high key, so important to do that. He'll fly up in the air and he will I guess maybe it's spit. Maybe it's not poop. We'll refer to it as spit, I guess. He'll spit on whoever is the closest target to him, always. It's always the closest target, and it was always one spit in between charges. So he just does charge, then spit, then charge and spit, then charge and spit, indefinitely for the rest of the fight. Now this is important. You can cover every other, I believe it's every other is the timing, spit, where you can, if you have a cunning pet out, you can cast Master's Call on whoever's out baiting, whether it's you. It should be either a ranged DPS or a healer that are out baiting, and then they're able to not worry about having to dodge the initial hit of the spit, because you have to be moving as it's falling, or you'll take at least one hit. And on Tyrannical, it does a lot of damage. So being able to, especially if there's a time where like we're trying to top everybody off going into this first phase or going into the second phase because we're low from these pistol shots, you can hit a freedom on your healer. He can stand there. He has 4 seconds to plant before he has to worry about anything. It's also easier to move out of the pool because he's not slowed. So that's why I think Freedom Pet can be really good on this boss for that specific situation, mostly because of the damage immunity rather than the slow immunity. And he has Revitalizing and Brew. You just kick this. You'll have kick up for every single one. And Azurite Powder Shot is different than it was in the past. Anybody that played BFA, this was like a demonic ability that you had to do weird LOS stuff and like pre-personal before stuff and just hope it picked you and things like that. But you don't have to do this really anymore. It's more about just staying spread out. We have lunge, so we have additional range. It's a lot easier to get into a spot where this cone won't hit anybody else. Importance of that is because your healer only has 1 dispel, and the damage has been shifted into a dot on this so that it is manageable, but still needs to be dispelled. So if you force your healer to dispel a second person, now you're in trouble. If you run dwarf, you can dwarf this off as well. I'll try to mention those too, because I think most people, maybe not most people, maybe we're just sick, or I'm just sick, but if you're serious about Mythic Plus, I think I highly recommend dwarf as the race you play for Hunter, because of how many debuffs you can just remove with dwarf. So I'll try to mention stuff that's dwarfable throughout here. But basically, any debuff that, most magic debuffs and magic, curse, disease, poison, all that stuff, as long as it's, and bleeds, are usually removable. Some things will have like a red border around them. Like if you look at your debuffs, it has red border, like it's specifically a red debuff is how I refer to them. Those are usually not removable, but most things are in Mythic Plus. So that is the end of our first section. Now I'm going to draw a little thing here. There's some tech you do as Hunter. Maybe not tech, but so this mob stands in front of the bridge as we look here, right? We how do I get out of this now? Anyways, we have tech here, or we have the bridge here with this mob. This is really, fighting this guy on this bridge is really inefficient. It's not something you really want to do. So Hunter makes this really easy to skip. Obviously, if you have a rogue, you can shroud by it. There's a couple other ways to get through, like Warlock can make a gateway over here, but Hunter makes it pretty easy to skip. You'll have, after this, your team mounts up after you fight the boss, and they get ready to jump over the wall down here. You run down to the left, you tag him, and you just run up the stairs. Bang, up here. Your team runs through. You're hanging out up here. He's like up the stairs here. He hasn't cast shit yet. And you just jump down over top, run all the way out to here, and then feign death and get him off. You can choose to either dismiss or not dismiss your pet. Sometimes your pet causes issues. If you're going to dismiss him, one, has to be before you feign death, obviously, because you might put yourself back in combat, come back up to dismiss him, because he might be in combat with your pet if he runs past him in the wrong way. Two, the best time to do it is here, right before you feign death, rather than early on, because, so like if you dismiss it up here, you're forcing your team to wait 3 seconds before this process starts, right? So that means they get to the next pack 3 seconds slower. If you wait to dismiss him here, only you incur that like 3 second penalty, right? So your team gets there, you didn't make them waste any time. You get to the pack 3 seconds late, but they got there 3 seconds early, which is going to be like make the key faster. So it's a really easy skip to do. After you do it the first time, you'll be like, oh my god, like I'll never mess this up ever. Don't need to use turtle anything. Cheetah makes it really easy if you have cheetah, but you can do it just disengage by waiting for him to come up like far enough, and then you jump over it, and he turns around to path back this way. So now we're into a lot of new mobs. Over here, we have all these smallies, the bar hands and deck hands. They do literally nothing. So any of those you see, do not worry about. There's some over here, some over here, over here. I'm going to talk about all these mobs between the second and third boss, because they all exist throughout all these packs, and you can do them in a lot of different orders. So first pack you'll see people do is kind of something like this, and they kind of run around the house over this way, and makes the pull a little bit dangerous. So things to watch out for are Oarsman, obviously, as Sea Spout. This is just moving out of the way of this. It snapshots your location when the cast ends, not when the cast begins. So you can't pre-move for it, right? So you wait for the cast to end, Swirly appears, you move out of the Swirly, blah, blah, blah. Very simple mechanic, but it gets a little bit complicated because of the Brute and Duelist in the pack. Now, the Brute is, anybody that watches my stream, it's kind of become a bit with me and my friend Greg, that anytime there's a Brute in any pack, him and I are just spam talking, saying there's a Brute in this pack, there's a Brute in this pack, there's a Brute in this pack, there's a Brute in this pack. And reason being is his ability Earthshaker, which does a huge physical hit on the tank, and it hits anybody within 4 yards of the tank. So in Mythic Plus, because you can't be parried, oftentimes it's actually pretty safe to play on top of the tank and like kite and move with the tank. So that becomes a habit for people that play Mythic Plus all the time, and it's important to recognize when you need to break that habit. And this is one of the mobs. When there is a brute in the pack, you have to break that habit and not stand on the tank. You will get one shot in high fort keys. Tyrannical does a little bit less. It's his only ability. It casts every 8 seconds. So very frequently, very important to be aware of. And other mobs that have spatial denial make that more difficult. So the Oarsman being one of them means you have to move around to dodge sea spouts. Make sure you're not dodging to the tank, because you could get yourself killed just by running on top of the tank. And then the Duelist also has an ability that makes this annoying. He casts Duelist Dash. There'll be a little brown swirly on the ground when he casts it. He's going to charge to that swirly, and anyone in the line will get hit by it and stunned. It does a little bit of damage and stuns you, which can then kill you on the Sea Spout cast or get you hit by a Brute. So this is a really good one to stop. This is a really good use of Intimidation, Scatter Shot, even Trap, if you can hit the trap within the mobs. Closer you are to mobs, the easier it is to hit the trap, I found, because there's no travel time really. So you find him, you stand right on top of him, drop a trap really close to you, and you can stop the Duelist Dash from happening. So you'll see these mobs in future pulls as well, but that's what those mobs do. Next, we'll see a pull over here sometimes gets done. This was actually really popular at the beginning of BFA and then was moved away from, but I think it's pretty good. The Swabbies are really good count, but this includes a Duelist, like we talked about, another Oarsman, like we talked about, a Padfoot, which is a new mob. This means nothing to us. It's just tank damage and a Disease Dispel, of which we cannot help. So just do damage. And then the Swabbies, which will put a long debuff on you and makes it so you can't jump. I recommend a Weak Aura for this. They're included in most of the dungeon pack Weak Auras that you can find just publicly available. This jumping here is very easy way to get yourself killed, and if you play a melee class, you're probably jumping all the time. So it's important to like almost like jump scare yourself and be like, dude, do not jump, do not jump, do not jump. I've heard there is also a Weak Aura out, which I'm not using yet, so I'm not gonna be able to share this, that literally turns your jump keybind off while you have the debuff. It's a Weak Aura that somehow manipulates your keybinds when you get a debuff or something. I don't know how it works. I'm an idiot. But I forget who was using it. One of my friends was using it and mentioned it, and he was like, yeah, dude, this works. If you literally cannot hit your jump bind if you have Slippery Suds. So pretty OP. I would look for that. I'm probably going to try it out today when I play and see if it works. But otherwise, it's just do damage to these. Up here, I'm not going to talk about these mobs. All the mobs that you find up here in this section upstairs are all elsewhere in the dungeon. So I will cover the mobs entirely, but I'm not going to go into the pulls up here because it is very rare you go upstairs to see these pulls, mostly because these packs are a little bit difficult to group to make double pulls. Some of the combinations of mobs are more difficult than stuff over here, and it's also like more travel time to the bosses and things like that, which makes the key longer. So these are generally just not done. You can do them. I went through a phase back in, I know I'm aging myself here talking about BFA all the time, where we just like made a route that was the upstairs route, and we literally just walked up here and killed everything and then showed up over here. And maybe it comes back. Maybe there's a reason it's good. Maybe people can make it good, but generally I would not expect to fight these ever. Next we move down into the second boss area, and usually you will see a pull that looks something like this. This has a few mobs we've seen already, but some new ones. We have the Trapper, which this is another really good use of a cunning pet for freedom. This is going to be a theme for this section, at least this up until the second boss. Freedom pet is very good. So the rat traps, the tooltip isn't listed here exactly, but when he puts these traps on the ground, if you are immune to movement pairing effects and you run through the traps will just be consumed and nothing happens. So you can use a freedom pet for that when they come down to just make some space, because you have room here, but you don't have a lot of room, because this pack comes down very close, and then you have the boss here obviously, and you want to fight kind of in this general area, and you can run out of space really quickly when the rat traps are on the ground. So being able to use freedom and clear them is really helpful. If you have a paladin in your group, they can do that as well. If you have a druid in your group, they can just go into travel form and do the same thing. They just become an animal and just run through everything, and they go away. There may be some other uses I'm not thinking of, but freedom pet is how we handle it. As far as the soggy ship rats, again, this is an enrage you can dispel, but these guys have no health. Don't worry about this. And this is a debuff on your tank you can't do anything about. So Can't help there. We can help with the Trapper. That's it. Then we have a Buccaneer. This is a new mob. We haven't seen the Buccaneers yet. We're going to see a ton of them over here. They just do a big spinny AoE. Generally, I would say this is not worth stopping. It's the indicator of where you take damage from this is very good now. It is very easy to tell when you're going to take damage from this. It is very easy to avoid it, especially as a hunter with longer range. So I would not waste a global stopping this. You just move out of it, and that's it. We have another Swabby that we've talked about already. We have another Brute. This is maybe the most dangerous Brute in the dungeon because of the area denial from the rat traps. So again, Freedom Pet, huge. Really makes you able to dodge the Brute pretty well. So think about that, and you're probably going to need it for this boss, which we'll talk about in a second anyway. We have a Knife Juggler. Nothing we can really do about this. This cast is a little bit too fast. I wouldn't even try to really stop these. This is really the only damage in the pack if you play the rest of it well. Tell your healer to heal you. Don't worry about anything. And then we have the Brine Scales. This is the classic, like a lot of dungeons are built in a way where it's like there's one mob in the pack that you can't pull more than like X of when you're making your design your pulls for the dungeon. Brine Scale is kind of the limiting mob in most of these packs in Freehold, that you have to have enough kicks to handle this. The Frost Blast is you can use a 1 AoE kick, or you can use a stop, like something like a stun or like an Intimidation or a trap or Scatter Shot work fine. But this is the big one. It'll do huge AoE damage to everybody in the group. So you need to make sure you stop this. This is what will wipe you. And then Water Bolts. These previously in BFA were cast only on the tank. So it was a little bit less dangerous. Your tank could handle this a little bit. Now they're cast on random targets, and that in combination with the ricocheting throw, doing a lot more damage than it did in the previous iteration of Freehold, make these kind of dangerous now. So you want to set up kick rotations or at least stun rotations, way to not let these Water Bolt just like free cast. So that's something you want to coordinate with your group if you can. If you're in a pug, I would use kicks on Water Bolt to lock out the spell school so that they can't spam Water Bolts. And I would use stops on Frost Blast. And when I say stops, I mean like anything but an interrupt. So stuns or scatter shots or whatever. So if you're trying to help your group the most you can, kicks on Water Bolt, stop on Frost Blast, but make sure you have enough for all of them, right? You'll always, if you only use kick on Frost Blast, you'll always have kick for it. But if the pack lasts long enough, you might run out of stops. So it's important to kind of like gauge that, like how long the mob's going to live. When you're doing that. I'm going to talk about this other pack first before we talk about the boss, just because oftentimes you want to clear out. This pack comes all the way down to where Eudora will kind of jump to, that you can't help her from jumping to. So clearing this before you fight the boss is usually pretty good, and it can be doubled with either of these packs. Most people choose this as a pack to do with it, and we have one new mob, I believe. We have Knife Jugglers, Brine Scales. Knuckle Duster is new, but this is just tank damage. This guy just punches the tank really hard. He's also, it's important to kind of know what the highest health mob is in any given pack, or at least kind of have an understanding. Like if you see my nameplates, my nameplates are designed in this way specifically that I don't show percent and I show raw HP value. I think that's the most valuable piece of information as far as like how much health a mob has you can have. I think percents are pretty useless. Generally, there are some situations where if like mobs do something at a certain percent, it could be useful. But generally speaking, percents on your nameplates are pretty useless. And raw HP value is usually the most valuable thing you can know when it comes to things like sanguine or bolstering or just like killing a pack efficiently. You generally want to be attacking the highest HP mob in the pack, right? And cleaving off him or her, so that the pack generally dies at the same time. You don't want to kill everything that has low HP and then have this one mob that you're fighting by itself. It's less efficient on your damage. It's going to be less efficient on time. So this is a generally speaking kind of tip, not specific to Freehold, is you want to know what is the high HP mob in a group. Now, obviously, there are some packs that have like a dangerous mob as opposed to a high HP mob that you need to kill first in order to live. And that always takes priority, right? Like if there's like, we need to not die, that's more important than being fast in the dungeon, because if you die, you're going to be very slow. So being able to differentiate between like there's a danger mob in this pack, or let's just attack the highest HP in this pack is an important skill, I think, for Mythic Plus, and just comes from like playing and experience and kind of knowing what's going to kill you. Generally in Freehold, there aren't many things that are going to kill you, right? The trash is mostly, does your tank live? And if your tank lives, you probably win. So in that, you can attack the highest HP mob. So Knuckle Dusters are, in most of this stuff, unless we have a Lieutenant mob in them, they're going to be the highest HP mob in any of these dungeons. So knowing that and targeting them is an important start, I guess, to improving. Then we have some Buccaneers again and a Knife Juggler and our introduction of the Scrapper. So Scrapper has one cast, is Blind Rage. He enrages himself, so he does huge damage. He fixates on somebody and just like runs at them and tries to melee them. Can't be tanked. Two ways to deal with this. Obviously, we have tons of stops, and the stops can be done during the windup. There's like an initial cast before he starts channeling the fixate at whoever he picks. You can use stuns, disorients, traps, incaps, all that stuff during the windup of it. And then after the windup is finished and he starts fixating, you can soothe it and he'll stop the fixate. The fixate is attached to the enrage buff. So that's another place we can help out. If you don't have a stun, you can soothe this. You can also feign death this off if it's on you. So that's another, like, just get rid of this, don't deal with it, and try to help your friends if you can. So basically I would use your CCs on friends if you need to, or on your allies if you need to. Soothe, CC, whatever you have to, and I would use Feign on yourself. Now, sometimes you'll get more than one back-to-back, and Feign's cooldown won't be up. So then you just start soothing stuff. Soothe will be up for everyone if there's only one in the pack, though. So let me get into the boss. This is usually you pull the boss after this. This is another spot where if you don't have another freedom in the group, I would absolutely run a freedom pet. I think it's like non-negotiable that you run a cunning pet. And that is specifically for Blackout Barrel. Now, this basically the guy, he throws an empty barrel at somebody, it disorients, you have to kill the barrel to pop them out. Now, if they are freedomed or master's called before the barrel lands, nothing happens to them. The barrel just lands and they move out of it. This also works on post. If the barrel's already on them, you can freedom them to break them out. It's important with this to not move when it's being cast if you know you're freedoming somebody, and communicating this with your team. So basically when the cast ends, he chucks the barrel out. It is snapshotted your position, right? While the barrel's in the air, because there's a little bit of travel time, if the person who was targeted on moves, it'll just land on the closest player to where the barrel lands. So communicating that you're going to freedom this and the guy shouldn't be trying to like avoid this thing is important. This can also be feigned if it's on you. This can be feigned, vanished, meld if you happen to be Night Elf, so that the barrel doesn't happen at all. Which is important because you can only freedom, or you can only master call every other one. Paladins can freedom everyone, but we can only master call every other. So trying to stop as many as you can with other ways besides the freedom, pretty important. His barrel smash we just move out of, otherwise this boss doesn't do anything. Eudora hits us with Powder Shot. This is something to just be aware of. Maybe use an Exil if you're targeted by one and you're low to not die. And then Grape Shot is she'll teleport to one of the four corners. Bang, 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 bang. Well, not teleport. She jumps, which is an important distinction, that she jumps rather than teleports. And then she will shoot starting from her left side, and she does like a 180, maybe it's more like 120 degree bang, 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 like a multitude of shots that you have to dodge, which if you just get behind her, you don't get hit by any of them. Now, it's important that she jumps and not teleports, because Harpoon is really useful for this in moving over to her quickly so that you can dodge her. And because she jumps, you want to make sure that she has jumped far enough before you hit Harpoon so you're not stuck in the middle of the arena. But you also don't want to wait till she's already landed. You kind of want your Harpoon to land like somewhere in the middle between, like, she's like 80% of the way to jumping where she was going to land, so that you don't get hit by the initial blast. Her hitbox is like pretty small, so the blast starts pretty close into her, which means right after you Harpoon, if you don't move at all right after you Harpoon, you will get hit by the first hit. But when you land, you just want to hold strafe left immediately, which for me is my A key. So I just harpoon, and before I even land, I'm already holding A. So I move to the left because she'll shoot to her left, which is our right as you're landing. You move to the left and you'll dodge all the hits. You get behind her, and that's it. So time the harpoon. I'm talking about this a lot, but it's really it's you'll see when you start harpooning to her. It's very easy. It's like intuitive when you want to use it, and that's that. That's the boss. Boss is pretty easy. Sometimes you'll see trash pulled onto this boss afterwards because of this ability. Oh, it's not listed here. Basically, this guy who is inactive, Captain Jolly, throws barrels or throws brews rather. Or maybe it's the bartender that's throwing it. Anyways, somebody is throwing brews the whole time, and there's 3 different ones. There's a haste buff, a crit buff, and a negative buff. You want to stand in the haste and crit. The bosses don't get the haste and crit buff, so you don't have to worry about your tank moving them out. And you want to not stand in the the bad one. The bad one's green, the other ones are blue. So stand in blue, don't stand in green. And the green also, it does a big dot on anything it lands on, including trash and the boss. So a lot of times you'll pull trash, and hunters can help in pulling this, whether these mobs or these mobs, because you don't want your tank to get harpooned out, which we'll talk about this harpooner in just a second, because it could reset the boss if your tank pulls out. So it's nice for you to pull this pack for your tank rather than them having to go pull it. Now, there's some times the tank can get away with pulling it, it's fine, but really helpful if you can. This pack has 1 new mob, and that is the harpooner, who has 1 ability on I want to say this is a 20-second cooldown. It says 6, but it's not 6. It's much longer than that. Basically, he just randomly picks somebody, can be anybody, and just drags them to him and does a bunch of damage. So because of that, you don't want your tank to... If your tank tags him and your tank is the only one in combat, and you guys kind of take a long time to get in combat with it, it becomes more likely that your tank gets dragged and then gets pulled out of the room, the other boss follows him, and it resets. So if you can help out by doing that, go for it. This is a good time to turtle. If you get harpooned right away before your tank has threat on this stuff, just rip a turtle and then run the mobs back in here. You're not really going to need it for anything else. Really good use, and make sure you don't die to get meleeed by 4 big dudes as soon as you get pulled out. And that's this section. Something you could be thinking about as we move into the third boss trash over here this entire time is, when can you use camouflage and feign death to start the RP over here. So the way this boss works is you have to run into this room, you talk to the guy in here, there's a minute of RP before this turtle spawns, there's a minute of RP before a pig is released, and then the pig has to be clicked 3 times so that it's caught. Another 20 seconds before the mini boss is released, you kill the mini boss, another 40 seconds before the boss is released. So there's some downtime over here that you want to fill with stuff. Now, if you can skip some of this downtime by just doing it ahead of time, especially this first minute RP, so the pig is just waiting here, you save a lot of time. You save a minute on your dungeon, right? So this is something that is quite useful to do maybe towards the end of one of these packs that you're fighting over here. I think the best way to do this, because obviously camouflage has a cooldown, so you can't camo in and then camo out. The best way to do this is to, before you pull the boss, maybe at the end of this pack, just rip a turtle and an aspect of the cheetah and get through all these mobs, and then feign death in the arena, talk to the guy, and then you can camouflage and come back to fight the boss. Important to know that you cannot camouflage while the boss is pulled, because you are in boss combat. You're in like global boss combat, so you cannot camouflage while the boss is pulled. So if you're trying to do it like right before they pull the boss without you, and you're like, yeah, I'll just get there late, like, you're not going to be able to get out of combat to camouflage to come back into this boss. So you have to do it before the boss is pulled if you're going to do some weird shit over here. Does save a lot of time on your keys, so that way after you're done fighting the boss, your team gets over here and there's just a pig waiting to be clicked. You don't have to wait the minute. So keep that in mind when you're fighting this. In pugs, I really wouldn't worry about it. I don't think you're going to... Most of the time in pugs, if you just do enough damage, you're going to be timing the key anyway, and you don't die, so I don't think you have to worry about that. But as you get into higher keys, if you're playing with a group and you want to be like, hey, how can we save time in Freehold? We're struggling. This is probably one of those big time saves that not everybody is doing, you can kind of bring to your group. So we'll talk about There's no new mobs here other than the Crusher. So like sometimes you'll see teams walk over this way behind the house and then fight this pack into here. Sometimes you'll see teams just clear out all this on their way over. Sometimes you'll see people go through the middle here. I'm not a huge fan of the old middle, but it's doable, mostly because the addition of the Crusher into the Harpoon packs. So we know the Harpooners pull you against your will into the center, and the Crushers have big AoE ground effects. They have Boulder Throw, which is targeted on a range, and Ground Shatter, which is a big AoE around them. This is the most dangerous for us. Usually a range doesn't grief you on Boulder Throw, and it spawns outside of melee, so not something you have to worry about. But Ground Shatter can. This is something where I recommend. I'm actually going to pull up another add-on here to talk about the Ground Shatter. So for boss add-ons, I'm sure everybody uses, or most people use some form of either bigwigs or deadly boss mods. I use bigwigs, and by extension, I use little wigs, which is a dungeon version of bigwigs. And then I also use bigwigs voice, which is just like a voice notification for when abilities are happening. Like a woman will say, Ground Shatter, when Ground Shatter starts to cast. And this is really useful, really useful. I'll show you how to turn this on as well when you have the add-on. So you come into Dungeon Bosses /BW, opens up bigwigs. You come into Dungeon Bosses, you find Freehold and Battle for Azeroth. And then we come down to the Crusher. And in here, you kind of check off what you want to track, and you come in here and you have voice activated. If you have the voice plugin, she will say Ground Shatter. This is important because I see people die to this all the time, to the Ground Shatter, and they're just like, oh my god, I didn't even know it was coming, boo-ba-da-bop. The cast starts, and there's like a second delay before the animation shows up where the cast is going to happen. So having this indicator, if you're like focusing on other stuff, you're not looking at spell, or you're not looking at his like cast bar on his nameplate or his cast bar in general, and you want to know when this is going to happen, this notification saves me all the time. I've found that like I don't ever die to this, and I see melee die to this all the time. Even like good players, like plays at the top end that just like, oh man, I didn't even see it was coming, and I know for sure they don't have this activated because it's I think this is impossible to die to if you have Bigwig's voice and you just have somebody say Ground Shatter when it starts casting. Because the only way you're gonna lose is if you the only way you're gonna lose is if you don't move before the animation shows up. You just have to be ready. You have to like start going right away. So that's obviously another add-on. I'll link to this. I'll link to Bigwigs, Little Wigs. We'll do MDT, Bigwigs, Little Wigs, and Bigwigs Voice. I'll put a link for in the description. Really easy to find if you use something like CurseForge or really any other add-on updater. I don't know if there are other ones anymore, like WoW Up or anything. I don't know if those still work. But anyways, Ground Shatter, activate the voice. It'll make this mob a joke. This is always going to be the highest health mob in any of these pulls that you do, so it's what you want to be targeting, unless there's a Harpooner in the pack. If there's a Harpooner in the pack, I think it is safer to target the Harpooner because the only way you'll die is by getting comboed from dragging Harpoon into a Ground Shatter, and that could kill you. So next we have the mini-boss. There's nothing special of note here at all. You simply attack him and you dodge his abilities. That's that's really it. There's nothing else to do. Just don't die. I guess something of note in this area is once either of these are engaged in this little this arena, you cannot leave the arena or you will get just destroyed. There's like basically fans watching, like spectators watching, that will throw food at you for leaving the arena because they're just like insulted by you leaving or trying to get back in if you die, right? Because you can release still when you're fighting the turtle and try to run back, but you will die. Pre-turtle doesn't work, so you're doomed. Just if you're dead and you're fighting this guy, do not release, even though it allows you to. Same goes for the boss, but the boss you won't be able to release. You'll have to get battle resed anyway. So yeah, don't try to get back in here. Then we have the boss. Boss is pretty straightforward. Ripper Punch, you can pre-turtle to not take the bleed. This can also be dwarfed. Doesn't cast very often, so it's really not a big deal. It's not like something I don't ever pre-turtle this. It's like it's the only damage that happens if you play the boss right. And It's fine. You can receive one single heal to not die. It'll be okay. I do rip a dwarf. If you get it, you might as well. But I wouldn't worry about the pre-turtle for it. It's a pretty long cooldown. Not a lot going on. Your healer can heal you. Then we have the Shark Tornado, which we can, as Survival Hunter, with the lunge talent, can still attack the boss. You just stand on the very edge. You will still be in range. If you're not in range, it means you're just being a baby and you're not getting close enough and you're afraid it's going to do damage. Just stutter step in until you get into melee range and figure out where that sweet spot is right on the edge of the animation. And then once you know where it is, you'll know where it is forever. The Shark Toss we generally just don't want to worry about. We just move away from him as best we can because we are melee. In a full melee group, sometimes you'll have opportunities to run out and like put these in the blood pools to slow them down, because you can still hit the boss from range pretty well. You can kind of, when you have a ranged moment, you can all right, let me get the shark out of here for you guys. But generally, this is just sorry, excuse me. Follow the boss. Don't get hit by sharks. Bang bang. The rearm is a positional requirement for you. You don't want to be in between the boss and a shark at any given time. The timers on this are a little bit sketch. They're accurate sometimes, but he'll delay these till after a shark tornado. If you're following your boss timers, they're not incredibly accurate because of spell queuing. But yeah, just don't be in between the boss and a shark at any given time. And that's really it for this boss. There's not anything else going on. Just do damage. Don't die. Bang, bang. All these other packs over here, which you might do this as a pack, you might do a pack here with this, all have just mobs we've seen before in these previous ones, so you know how to deal with those. And then we're going over to the last boss section. This is our ending. We don't have too many new mobs, but we do have a couple. This first part here, we have the Stormcaller and the Ravager. We'll talk about the Ravager first because of the Painful Motivation buff, and this is shared with the Officer. So we'll talk about Ravager and Officer together in this sense. The Officer's extra ability is just a tank hit that you can't do anything about. It needs to be dispelled by your healer. Nothing much you can really do. But both of these mobs will cast Painful Motivation. And what this does is it attaches a debuff to the other mobs around, or an enrage buff. Is it an enrage buff or magic buff? I think it's an enrage buff. To all other mobs around them that causes them to do 50% bonus damage, but they take 1% of their max health in damage every second. So this is good if you can survive. It is good to not kick this. And mostly when I say if you can survive, I mean if your tank can survive for the most part, because the rest of this doesn't really do too much group damage in here. The Stormcallers have some abilities I'll talk about in a second, but generally you want to let these go off unless, and I'll get into the unlesses in a second here. The Stormcaller has Lightning Bolt, which is cast at the tank. You want to stop as many of these as possible. They do really big damage to the tank. And then Thundering Squall, this is a must stop. It's a pretty long cast. Can kick it or stop it with something, but you're basically dead if this goes off. It does huge damage, huge AoE damage to everybody. And if it gets a second tick off, you're definitely dead. The initial tick happens right when the initial cast ends, so you can't like wait and I'll get it before the first tick. Like, have to get this immediately. If you, for whatever reason, don't have a stop, you know it's going off, do look to see if it's buffed by the Painful Motivation and try to soothe it. Trank Shot will remove this and reduce the damage by 50%, and maybe you guys live because it's reduced by 50%. So in an emergency, if you do not have a way to stop Thundering Squall, a tick is going to go off for sure. You're forced out of range, something you just like can't do anything. For whatever reason, you can't do anything, which would be very weird, but for whatever reason you can't do anything, make sure it's soothed. Like, just be tracking buffs on your nameplates and make sure it's soothed. Next new mob in here is, I think this is the last new mob actually, is not the Ravager. So this is a Buccaneer as well, but it's an Iron-Tide Buccaneer as opposed to this, which was a Bilge Rat Buccaneer. So they have different spells. This is just a frontal. It's Blade Barrage. It picks the tank, and then he just stands in one place and fires his knives out. Pretty short range, but just don't be in front of the mob. And this is basically a non-ability. Up here we have an Oarsman again, which makes these pulls, like, Oarsman's in this pack as well. The Oarsman is really what makes all this other stuff difficult, right? Like, these mobs are not generally difficult on their own. The Oarsman area denial makes it a little bit annoying because you don't have a lot of space here to dodge. So just be aware of all this stuff in here. This dog is the same dog from the beginning. This enforcer is then the same enforcer from the beginning. So like I said, let the painful motivation go off unless, this is kind of an unless situation. I prefer to let it go off, but if you want to play it safe, you can kick or you'll have to kick. This can't be stopped. She can't be stunned. So you have to kick this painful motivation. The reason I like to let it go off is we can just soothe the enforcer. The real danger here is painful motivation goes off, and then this guy's buffed by 50%. He casts Shattering Bellow, and he just does infinite damage to your group. But if you're paying attention, and you can get the soothe off, because I haven't seen a situation yet where they've overlapped in a way where it was impossible to fit the soothe in, and before like the Bellow cast finished. Normally they'll be pretty close, so you have to be like on point, maybe hold a global for it. But I think it's worth to let it go off if your tank can live. Obviously, if your tank can't live, you're just kicking it. And in pugs, usually it's just like, let's protect the tank and not die. And same thing with Stormcaller, you just want to protect her as well. Now, there is some tech here that Hunter is very good at doing that wasn't in BFA. So anybody coming back from BFA, this is like new stuff you'll have to learn how to do. This pack is now linked to the boss. You used to be able to just pull this boss and you fought him in this hole down here, and you never fought this pack and it was fine. Not the case anymore. You have to kill this pack if you want to fight the boss. Unless you have a class like Hunter or a Night Elf or a Rogue that could do some funky stuff to make this happen. So basically, the pack will engage when the boss is pulled, right? But the pack is not tied to the boss in the sense that if you're fighting the boss, you're always fighting the pack. So what I mean by that is you can make it so you can only fight the boss by itself with some tricky stuff. And the way this is done is you, as the hunter, pull this pack yourself. So you are the only person in the group in combat with it. Usually you'll stand over here while your team's like down in the hole here. You'll stand here, you'll pull this pack. While you're in combat with the pack, your tank pulls the boss, and the boss is over here. And then before this pack gets to you and kills you, you feign death. And so you drop combat with this, nobody else is in combat. The boss has already been pulled, so there's no like entering combat trigger to cause this to pull, because this only pulls the moment you enter combat with the boss, right? It's not like being in combat with the boss makes them pull. So by having already pulled the boss while in combat with this and then feigning it off, you can then fight the boss by itself over here. This is important because there's a strat used for a lot of this trash where the boss actually kills the trash for you. You'll use it on a lot of stuff up here if you have a way to skip up to the boss, basically. And what that is the boss's ability, Cannon Barrage. This is the big orange swirly on the ground. It picks one person. They move out of it. Done. Now, when the boss hits 60%, he makes all his abilities cast on everyone, except the tank. So all his abilities will be cast on everyone except the tank. So you have 4 sets of cannons, and they all do damage. And these cannons do damage to the trash. So a strat you'll see is you'll use your hunter, whatever you have in your group, to skip this pack. You'll fight the boss down here until 60%, because generally this boss is not really dangerous until 60%. It's pretty easy to just like be in a corner and who cares. And then at 60%, before a Cannon Barrage cast happens, you'll go up, you'll pull this pack. Everybody stands on top of each other. You drop 4 sets of bombs on top of these mobs, and they all die. And then now you didn't have to fight them at all. This is enabled by playing Hunter or Night Elf or Rogue, but Hunter is very good at this. Makes this really easy. So it's something that Pugs probably won't do, but if you're playing in a static group, it's probably worth practicing setting this up and killing them. It's a huge time save. These are big health mobs that you no longer have to fight. It's pretty easy. It's not really that difficult to do. Just have to wait for 60% for it to work. So let's look at the other abilities of the boss. I think that was important talking about with this trash pack, but boss does do other things. First, he has a Vastier, which is the ad he spawns. Now, generally, this is like right here is where the ad spawns every time, and he'll fixate one person, run at him, and blow up if he gets there. We can trap everyone as Hunter. As long as you're good about getting your trap down as soon as the cooldown comes up, and there's not like a mob or an ad still there trapped, you want to drop your trap. And you will be able to get everyone except I think the cooldown catches up if the boss is long enough one time around like minute and a half, 2 minutes into the fight, where you'll have to use like an intimidation into a scatter or ask your team to do one, and then you'll be caught up because you have the fresh freezing trap cooldown for the next one. So we pretty much do this mechanic ourselves. You shouldn't need help. You can solo it. If you want to ask for help, go for it. Like some classes have an easier time as well, and then you just cast paralysis as a monk or something like that. But generally, you can be like, guys, I'll handle the ads. It's fine. And make sure your tank doesn't tank the boss right on top of here if you're going to do that, because if AoE cleaves off your trap, obviously you don't have a trap anymore, and things can get messy. So you want to tank like somewhere over here or down the hole or over here. Like all these are pretty safe places to be. And we have Whirling Dagger. This is just a bleed, does damage. The ones at 60% and below become pretty dangerous. So these are places you want to use Exil. You want to use Health Pot. You can pre-turtle to not take it if you don't even want to take the dot at all. Very good use of Survival of the Fittest. Could run a tank pet for this as well. There's no real need for a freedom pet. Leech pet on single target is much lower value than on AoE. Tank pet on this boss is pretty good. And yeah, it's really the first one at 60% is the most dangerous because you get Whirling Dagger into immediate Cannon Barrage. And that's also, if you're going to be bombing the trash, you're also going to be doing that at the same time. So it's all like, healer can't heal because we're bombing trash. We're taking huge damage. There's trash that might get some weird casts off and take some extra damage in that way. You might get bit by a dog. So that's a good time to definitely dwarf or just use any personal you have available pretty much. And then you have the Swiftwind Saber, which is just, for the beginning of the fight, it is just a frontal on the tank. And then at 60%, it becomes it's just tornadoes you dodge coming out of the boss. Our longer range of survival makes this pretty easy to dodge. You can kind of back up and definitely not get hit. But otherwise, that's it. At 30%, he takes bonus damage. This is, however, not worth... Do not save damage for this. It is better to push the 30%, or is the same to push the 30% faster by using cooldowns as it is to finish the boss very quickly at 30% with him taking double damage. Like, basically just imagine that he pushes at 15%, right? Because that last portion of health, that 30% is basically him being at 15% since he takes double below there. So it's not where it's just, you just use your abilities, use your cooldowns, don't save stuff. And that's generally the rule for all of this. You notice I haven't mentioned really specific cooldown usage on any of these pulls because just use your stuff. All these packs are pretty equally dangerous. They're pretty equally long. They're same mobs in most of the stuff all throughout the dungeon. There's not really a reason to not use your cooldowns on cooldown in here. Yeah, especially in here. I think that's the biggest trap people get caught in is they're like, oh, he takes double damage. If I save cooldowns for this, it will make the boss die faster. But it's like, well, if you use your cooldowns, you would have pushed him into the double damage faster, and then the boss would have died. It's the same. You just just use your stuff when you use your stuff. If you're trying to pad overall, sure, save your cooldowns for the 30%. But if you're just trying to do the key in the correct amount of time, it is no different. And I think that's it. I know this is like, and I've said this with every video that I've made so far this season. It is an atypical way of approaching this kind of thing. But I think, at least from the feedback you guys are giving, it's been pretty useful. Like, it's been like very useful, and you guys have appreciated this long form, just talking version of this. So with that, obviously this is kind of a new endeavor in the videos that I'm making. If you have feedback, I'm really, really curious. Feels a little bit weird to me. Like, there could be some ways to make these better. If you guys have ideas, please let me know. Or if you just liked it, like that's really helpful too. I'm not just trying to fish for compliments here. Knowing that you guys enjoyed and like we're found this content useful is very useful to me as I move through the rest of the dungeons and try to make them better by the end. And then if we end up in a better formula at the end of the dungeons, maybe we come back and I redo Freehold or something. So yeah, like the video if this was helpful. Leave a comment if you want to say hello, or you want to tell me to go fuck myself, whichever it is. I don't care. Both of those are useful to me. And check me out over on Twitch. I am on a little, as much as I hate to say it, I'm on a little bit of a hunter break right now. I'm kind of getting other characters geared to see what I find fun as alts. So I've been playing a lot of Rogue this week. And as I get through that, as I start playing other stuff, I might start doing these same videos for other classes as well. So like Rogue is in particular, I'm pretty invested in. Thinking about trying Shadow Priest, and maybe I'll start doing stuff like this for that too. A lot of it comes down to how much time I have to, like, 1, between playing the game, 2, existing as a person, and then 3, making the content. We'll see what I can get through. So appreciate you guys for watching. If you got here, holy crap, you made it through. How long is it? Holy crap, an hour. Really appreciate it. Hope it was helpful. And I'll see you in the next one. Probably in a couple days we'll start tackling the other dungeons. So thanks.